Okay, so I think we'll get going. Let's just flip on the old webcam and say hello. Hi there. Thank you to those of you who are here, and we'll just get going with some kind of preamble before we kick off. So today we're going to be having a look at D5 Render. It's a little bit of an intro to the software if you've not used it before. Just give you an idea of some of its capabilities, and I think hopefully just to see it working live. I think it's all very well having nice pictures, but actually be able to see what you can achieve like realistically, I think is always useful. Just kind of housekeeping before we get going. What you should be able to see on your screen somewhere, it should be a little bar. There's a series of different things that you're going to be able to do during the webinar here. So there is a chat option on the right hand side. So feel free to chatter away in the corner. I'll just type something in there again. Down there. There's also a section in there for questions. So if you have any specific questions as we go through, if you want to use the question section, that will send it to the team and that will log it in the system so I can hopefully come and answer those. And then we can email you out those answers at the end if we don't get to answer them in person. So that's the plan for today, is that we will go through today's little webinar, and then we'll just answer some questions at the end about stuff as they come in. So I think with that in mind, I don't think there's anything more complicated than that. I think it's going to be a case of you're all on mute. You've probably noticed that already, so I won't be able to hear you. Ask questions, chat, do what you want to do, and let's get going. So last thing before we get going, apologies if any cats jump on me in the middle of this webinar. That's quite a common thing. Likewise, hopefully you won't hear it. Lots of parcels arriving as we approach Christmas, so please ignore any doorbells you might hear ringing of mine. I mean, if you get your doorbell ring, by all means, go and answer it, but hopefully we don't get any interruptions during the next hour-ish. Okay, right, let's get the slides actually moving. So my name's Adam Fairclough. I'm the Customer Success Manager here at Elmtec UK. We're the distribution partner for SketchUp in the UK, so we look after SketchUp, and that's probably where most of you have found this webinar from. But we also look after some other bits and pieces too, rendering engines, rendering packages, extensions, other bits and pieces that all work with SketchUp. My background, I come from a kind of technology background, but kind of stuff that's relevant to today, and some kind of art tool and rendering consultation for companies like Xbox and Samsung. So I have a couple of areas of expertise. This is kind of one of the ones that I'm most interested in. Also a really keen photographer, so if you want to come and find me on Instagram and say hello. I haven't put anything on for a while, but that's where I spend my time online. So let's get straight into it. Just going to have a few slides to begin with, just to give you a little bit of background on the technology. Traditionally, with rendering, we've had kind of two things that we've had to deal with, and that is the level of kind of realism or naturalism they're able to achieve within our images, and that is versus the time that it takes to actually produce those images. So historically, we've had the real-time renderers that are kind of lower down on that scale. They're unable to achieve certain things that maybe made them look a little bit video gamey, or perhaps you might describe as a little bit more stylized, or you had to put a lot of extra effort into it to maybe make that look more realistic. At the other end of the scale, we had the kind of offline renderers, and the offline renderers are the ones that you may have seen or used. These are the ones that sort of start off very, very grainy, and then over a period of minutes or hours or even days will become sharper and look more like a final image. Of course, those are the kind of gold standard for producing absolute photorealistic images. And there's a lot we can do there, but there's a huge time sink that we have to make, not just through working on our files, but also actually rendering them. And this is particularly pertinent when we think about the kinds of things that we need to do now. If we've got the clients that would like videos or walkthroughs, these kind of things, in order to make a second of video, we need to produce 24 images to make 1 second of video. And that's not really practical if your images take, I don't know, 4 hours, 8 hours to render each one. So video's kind of been something that's been kind of left behind a little bit when it comes to certain types of rendering. And it's why companies like Pixar and DreamWorks traditionally had huge warehouses full of computers, spending a few minutes making every frame rather than a week at a time making every frame. But as normal human beings, we don't have that capability. However, in the last few years, things have really shot forwards with real-time rendering, both from a software perspective, sort of algorithms, but also from a hardware perspective as well. And this is kind of where sort of D5 render actually comes in. D5 can make use of some of these new technologies, these software and hardware technologies, to kind of bridge that gap quite significantly. And we'll have a look at this working in a moment. You've probably seen those pretty pictures in the background. Those have all come straight out of D5, and those scenes would all be visible in real time. We could walk around those and look at those happening as we see them there. So kind of the big advantages with real-time renders is that we have this really massive increase in the speed of iteration. So as we're working on our model, on our CG, on our render, we can make changes. We can see those things happen immediately. And this also means that actually the render time at the end, we might be waiting in the case of, we might even press the render button whilst we're in here, see if it works. You know, we're talking seconds rather than hours to produce a single image, and that of course then translates across to producing videos and animations. Now a little bit about D5. So D5, which is Dimension 5, the company that makes D5 render, based in Singapore. They are a partner with graphics card manufacturer NVIDIA, so they have access to some of their advanced hardware technologies, which is utilized in D5 render. We're also a partner of Unreal Engine as well. So Unreal Engine, obviously quite ubiquitous across many different industries now, whether it's architectural visualization, TV and movie production, video games, of course, the company that made Fortnite and Gears of War, and their technology is used by a huge number of video games. But massive software company that just has some amazing technologies at their disposal. And these are all kind of part and parcel of D5 as well. So just before we kick off, because I know this will come up as a question at some point, so we'll just flash these up on screen. What are the system requirements for D5 render? So right now, and probably into the future, it's for Windows only. So you need a version of Windows which is supporting DXR, which is a graphics technology. Not a Mac, I'm afraid, Mac users. I'm probably going to see a few people drop off, but stick around if you want to see how it works. Apple doesn't support any of these technologies, so that's the limitation that we have right now. In terms of the hardware side of things, so D5 render requires a DXR compatible graphics cards. Those are anything that is newer than an NVIDIA 1060. And then on the AMD side, the AMD 6000 series also support DXR, and then coming in the future, the Intel Arc cards as well, which are new on the graphic card scene. So we'll see what happens with those ones, but in theory, those also support DXR. So quite widely supported. What we will find is the NVIDIA cards have access to a couple of extra software functions because they have some hardware to deal with some other things. We'll talk about those very shortly. So I'm just going to bring up this slide here, and I'm going to just talk about a couple of the unique technologies that sit within D5 render. I think one of the things that we often get asked about this is, yeah, it's based on Unreal Engine. How is that different to Unreal Engine itself, or how is that different to other packages that maybe use Unreal Engine as a base? Well, the main big differences are that D5 render is natively built with ray tracing in mind. So it makes use of NVIDIA's RTX real-time ray tracing technologies, which we'll show some examples of if you don't know what that means. It also has some customized global illumination technology that's been built by D5 specifically for the purpose of the type of rendering that most of you will be doing. So again, Unreal Engine is quite a broad technology, but they've actually built some systems specifically for kind of architectural visualization. And we'll have a look at what those are, what that means, you know, what is all this jargon that we've got on screen here. For those of you who understand what some of these other things are, we also support NVIDIA DLSS, which is an amazing technology that basically increases performance whilst we're editing and whilst we're rendering quite considerably, up to 800% if we're rendering high resolution images. So things will run really smoothly and our computer's kind of freed up to make other calculations if we need to. It's also got its own denoiser. If you're not familiar with a denoiser, if we have a noisy image like that, it can remove that and keep the image intact. So it's got some technologies designed specifically for architectural rendering. It also has some technologies and some capabilities that have been customized for very large scenes. So we'll show some of these as well. But if we're doing very, very large scale renderings, for example, cities, it can handle these, which might be a bit trickier in other places. Brilliant. Okay, right. So let's jump into actual example of some bits. Let me just bring up this window. Hopefully we can see that there. It is paused. It is pausing screen sharing. Right, let me do that. Why is it pausing my screen sharing? Sorry about this. Right, hopefully we can see this here. If one of the team that is there can just let me know that we can see that, that would be good. Or if somebody in the chat or the questions can just let me tell me that you can see what we're looking at. Should be a red and a green and a blue thing on the screen right now. Oh, people are flashing, that's good. It's there, brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, so just going to bring up this little example of here. This is something that we commonly use in rendering to highlight and explain a couple of things that we're interested in. So this is what we call a Cornell box. So this is just a little box. I'm in real time at the moment. So it's a little box, red side, green side, and a blue side. And we've got a couple of objects inside, and we've got a light sitting at the top of this, which is casting light in every direction. Now, this is doing a couple of really interesting things that we really struggled to do in real-time rendering previously. And this is related to global illumination. So global illumination is essentially the calculating of the way that ambient light behaves inside of our scene. So the bits that make the biggest kind of impact in regards to this technology, we've got the light casting out light, and it's casting out rays of light, and they're hitting this green wall, and they're actually bouncing off this green wall and hitting this. So this is actually being illuminated by some of the color that exists on the objects near to it. We can see the same thing here as well. The light's bouncing upwards, hitting that blue ceiling and coming down, and it's actually having effects on the color of, say, the shadows here, and even the floor. So this is all white material. We can see this is probably kind of a bluish color. We can also see the same thing, the red having an influence on this front surface of this cube here. Now, normally when we looked at real-time rendering stuff, this was, everything looked quite flat. So let me just bring up an example there. I think in many people's mind, when they think of real-time rendering, they think of something like this, very flat, very lacking in kind of detail and character. Global illumination allows light to behave a little bit more realistically. So I think this particular scene, if I had the global illumination turned on, the windows, for example, that are between these panels, which you can't see right now, are illuminating this wall, but as the light bounces further into our scene, only things that would actually be lit are lit, so we don't get that horrible flatness. And this is what we can see happening also in our Cornell box here. We can see that our shadows aren't totally black and dark. You know, the shadows have light in them because there is light bouncing from other places where light does exist into our scene. And this is all happening in real time. So I can make changes to my model where my light is, and we can see it having an effect on that. And so this is part of the global illumination system that D5 has that is customized for it. So another thing that we can see here is a real-time reflection. And if I just turn on another object there, we can see something else happening. So we can actually see that how the reflections in D5 are actually physically accurate. So as we're moving objects around, we can actually see those objects changing in our reflection. But what's most useful about this, and this might be something you take for granted, is that actually we can reflect things that exist behind us, just like they do in the real life. So if I make this little sphere a metal object, for example, let me just change this. Let's make it metal. We can see that my now metallic mirror sphere is able to reflect everything that's not just on screen, but things that are in fact, behind me. He's over there. So this is something that's always been really hard to do in real time. And if you've used some other real-time renderers, you may have noticed kind of weird anomalies with mirrors either not looking perspective correct or having weird black smudges or kind of strange stuff going on inside of them. And the real-time reflection capabilities of D5 are really, really amazing. And that's not just from mirrors. Every single surface that we come across reflects light and reflects the world around it in some way. And so even if we did something there, all of our materials here are now reflecting things that exist within our world. And again, really hard to do in the past, but now really, really easy and allows us to achieve very natural results. So another part of the customization for D5's own system is its ability to not only create this very natural looking global illumination, but it can also be influenced by emissive material. So this is a little sphere, and this sphere has actually been set to cast light outwards. So it's actually glowing is the easiest way to imagine that. I've got it set, if I turn it off, in fact, we can see it there. We want to make that glow. I can make this glow any color, and this is actually going to behave as a light within our scene. And this is a real boon to sort of CG artists, because previously, if we wanted to make something glow, we could make it look like it was glowing there, but it wouldn't actually cast light into our model. So we then would have to grab another light and we'd have to put it kind of near it, and then we'd have to give that light a different color. And then we'd end up with shadows in places that we didn't want them, and things were kind of had an extra level of fake going on just to achieve something that you might expect to behave in a normal way, but they didn't. So there's some really amazing technologies D5 uses to make this easy. So that's obviously something that's a little bit abstract here. Let's fire up one of the demo scenes and have a look at that. So included with D5, we've got a couple of demo scenes. And I'm going to load up, first of all, we're going to load up a small interior scene. Hopefully you can see my screen here. So this is actually a good one if you want to have a look at this yourself. Not only useful for just benchmarking and just checking that the software runs okay on your computer, but it's also nice to see a scene that somebody's made who's obviously very good at using D5 and obviously has an eye for this stuff. So we're now in a real-time model here, and we can explore it and we can look around. We're going to have a look at some of the controls in more detail and kind of what we can change, but hopefully you can see straight away just how quickly we can make changes to the lighting. So for example, I just want to look at the artificial lighting that exists in my scene. I can just simply change the time of day and get an immediate view on how my model is going to look. So we can do I've got the weird setting on, so one sec. We've got an interior scene, which is really useful just to validate that your computer can kind of deal with that type of stuff, if that's the kind of stuff you're doing. But let's have a look at something a little bit bigger, something that is a little bit more taxing. And I think we talked about this actually at the start there. D5 has some capabilities for handling very large scenes. I've got a whole city, there we go. And again, I like seeing these because I see all these amazing visualizations and renders from all the different packages, and I wonder who on earth's made these and how, where have these come from. So it's actually quite amazing to see it running on my own computer, and also just, as I said, have a little look at how they've been constructed and kind of extract some tips and tricks from them. So the interior that we looked at and the city scene are both demo scenes that you can very easily download to have a look at. Now the city scene is a bit more taxing because there's more stuff going on. I'm just going to give it a moment to load. What we'll see here is straight away we've got a scene that looks, if I turn off all those little dots and things, let's just hide those. We've got something that we could possibly not be able to distinguish from real life at this point. And this is a much bigger scene, so I'm just going to move to a different point of view and let my computer catch up. We can see that we've got lots of stuff going on here. And we can see that no matter what time of day it is, all of my reflections are accurately reflecting, can't talk, what's behind me, what's in the place that is correct for the position of that reflective surface anywhere in the model. And this is a huge model with cars and foliage, loads and loads of different stuff going on. It's really amazing just how well this works on my computer. We probably won't cover it today, but a big part of what D5 can do is very easy to make animations, not only kind of walkthroughs and fly-throughs, but you can also create animated objects within your model. So, for example, vehicles that drive and move around, fixed paths within your model, people that do the same, people that are animated, people that move, but you can also create object animations. So I think about things like grand designs where we see the buildings being constructed in a visualization. You can achieve that kind of thing inside of D5 as well, but a very, very high level of fidelity. So really, really impressive piece of software. Well, let's jump across now into actually having a look at how do we use it. So let me close this and I jump into SketchUp. I'm just going to have a look at the questions and just see if we've got anything that we need to do. Brilliant. Okay, so no questions so far, but if you think of anything you see you want to know about, type it in there and we'll revisit them at the end. So I'm just going to have a look at my model here. So I'm just inside a SketchUp model, really basic one, which is just a little scene with some openings and an outdoors and an indoors. And I've got 3 or 4 scenes that I've made for this. This is this little room. So with our, I just realized I skipped over a whole bit. So D5 itself, let's just go ahead. I have really skipped over a whole lot. D5 itself works with SketchUp. It has a plugin for SketchUp. I know we normally talk about SketchUp because that's where you will come from, but also there are plugins for Revit, 3ds Max, Blender, Rhino, and ArchiCAD. So you can use the plugin to send your files into D5 Render. Of course, D5 Render itself is kind of standalone to all of the pieces of software, so you can kind of mix and match. You can simply import files in if we need to. And we'll have a look at how that works today. Of course, I'm looking at SketchUp, but primarily the plugin support offers the option to open D5, send our geometry into it, synchronize our cameras, synchronize our scenes, synchronize our lighting, and some other bits and pieces. So there's just a grid there, which you can obviously revisit. It's on the D5 website. And let's hop across back into the model. Sorry, I just skipped over a whole bit there that I meant to talk about. So it works with lots of different pieces of software, which is useful because we get files and bits and pieces from all over the place. So I've just got a really basic interior model here, as we said, some windows, similar to the one we looked at before actually. And we can see I've set up scenes as I normally would do in SketchUp. And pretty much the only real things I've done within this model right now are I have applied some materials to different places within my model. So just the standard SketchUp materials, kind of pinky colored wall. I've used one material on the floor, another material on the back here, and a few other materials at different places. I've muted my phone. I don't know if you could hear that, but my Mac is now binging at me, so I'm going to plug that. Forget they're all linked together. There we go. Where was I? We're applying different materials across our model, as we normally would do. Really kind of useful to know, as with most rendering packages, D5 treats each material in your model as a single material. So if we want to be able to apply a different material to this wall, separate to this one, and separate to this one, just need to make sure that in SketchUp we've applied separate materials to them at this point. That's going to make things a little bit easier later on. So you'll see I've got a couple of different variants of grey, a couple of random colours in places, and that's just because I know that I'm going to apply a different colour or perhaps a material that has a slightly different property in a certain place. What we've got going on in here as well, so in terms of our plugins, let me actually fire up D5. So I'm going to send my model into D5 just here. I'm already 25 minutes in, so got to make sure that I keep on time and respectful of your time. I think we've set aside an hour, so we'll go around till about 3:30. If people want to stick around for any questions after, of course, we can look at those ones. I can see a little icon flashing on my screen there saying somebody might have a question. What graphics card is my machine using for this demo? So I've got a laptop actually. So this is running a Quadro RTX 3000, which is a workstation card. Well, it's part of a laptop. That is broadly equivalent to an NVIDIA RTX 2060 laptop version. If you're using the desktop versions are always more powerful again. So again, that's kind of, in the scheme of NVIDIA's cards, that's kind of a mid-level GPU actually. In terms of what that means, your render is always going to come out looking the same regardless of what your the capabilities of your machine are. It's just maybe how smooth or how well things run here. You might notice it a little bit. I've got a little bit of kind of blotchiness that appears as I'm moving around. That's just my laptop calculating a little bit slower than I can move. So we're in our model now, and I've made a couple of changes already in advance for this one actually, so apologies for that because I usually use something totally blank, but I've applied a little bit of a reflective material to the floor. I've made this material, which is a strip, I've made this an emissive material that glows, so when I can turn off my lights, I can see those actually illuminating my room. And we'll have a look at actually again how super useful that is in itself, just being able to do that. And I think I've placed a couple of assets into my model. So let's just have a little walk through the interface. Over on the left-hand side, we can see our scene list. So these have actually come through from SketchUp. So my scenes in SketchUp, I have a button in my D5 render plugin, send scenes, and that will basically synchronize the scenes from SketchUp into D5. And these are all here now. It's just going to render little previews for those as it goes through. So we can see our scenes. Down here, we've got a kind of outliner, I suppose, so we can see any models that I have imported into my overall project. So I've got my actual SketchUp model, which is called arches.skp. I can hide it. There's a bit of bamboo there. And we can see some lighting objects. We can see that bamboo that was there, that's its own thing. And I can see my light fittings. If I move backwards, you can see levitating. We can see these here as well. So I'm able to hide things individually. I can select anything that's in this list. I can select, I can reposition it, I can rotate it, I can do all these kinds of things. So that's my little world outliner there. We'll have a look at this in a moment, but big important part of what you're paying for is the assets in the top left there. Over on this side of the screen, we've got our environment tab. So our environment allows us to change the type of lighting that we're using. So we've got either a calculated atmosphere and sunlight, which should be geosynced with SketchUp if you sent it from your SketchUp model. So of course, really important that our shadow positioning is correct, and we can change the time of day, and we can see that the atmosphere changes the way that light's scattering, thus the color is changing. We've got options to be able to change the offset if we want to override it, options to be able to change the day and time of year, and then manually specify the longitude and latitude. Other environmental options to just draw some clouds into the sky. Let me just increase that so you can see it. There we go, slow them down. Off in the distance there, options to be able to create kind of atmospheric fog or mist. So let's do that. Let's try and make some nice beams of light come in. Oh, I've ruined my time of day now. There we go. So we can create volumetric lighting coming into our model. Looks cool. And then some options to be able to control the wind, which has an effect on water, I think, and maybe trees. But let's turn those off for the time being. So that's our environment tab. Now we can choose to light it with sky and sun, or if we prefer, I know some people do, we can choose to use an image-based lighting solution. So we can use an HDRI image to generate the light that lights our model. And we can also then, on top of that, we can add in a directional sun, so we can kind of mix and match. So that's kind of more of a less physically accurate way of representing our world, but it can achieve some very nice looking things. And there's some built-in HDRIs for different times of day. And there's various different parameters on that side there to be able to change the way they're facing, how bright they are, how bright the sun is if we've got it turned on, the color temperature of the sun, these kind of things. What you'll hopefully notice is that D5 is shown in quite an intuitive way. Everything is fairly obvious as to what it should be doing. And again, I think this is kind of one of the things that probably separates it from Unreal Engine in itself, which is a really complex tool. You can obviously achieve anything there, but it's a really complex tool. And this streamlines and simplifies that process considerably. considerably. So yeah, environment, middle tab here, effects tab. This is going to give us some options to be able to adjust, say, our exposure, use auto exposure, change the way our image looks, contrast, highlights, shadows. I'm not going to touch into these, the overall white balance of our image. Some of the things that we might do in Photoshop afterwards, but we can do them here. Again, useful if we're producing videos, maybe just save some time. And then other options for other sort of post-processing effects like, I've got the wrong kind of sun to be able to show this. Things like bloom, which makes highlights kind of glow, kind of gives us that Vaseline on the lens type effect. We always have a little bit of that. I'm going to have to turn that right down because it'll bite me in the behind at some point. Lens flares, which introduce those types of things. And then, of course, a global saturation override. So there's a whole bunch of different bits and pieces there. And those are primarily the things that we will look at maybe just initially when we're setting up our scenes. I'm just going to put those back to kind of something that I think looks nice. Let's come around there. I had it looking nice before I arranged all these things, so it's silly of me. All right, let's do that. And then let's have a look at how we can actually start to utilize materials, edit our surfaces, and then maybe look at some assets as well. So let's have a look at some assets actually to begin with. So up here in the top left, there are two options. We've got the option to import, and we can actually import in geometry. So if we wanted to import in a separate model that's separate from our main geometry, I could use import, and we'll see the imports that we can bring in. FBX, which is a really ubiquitous 3D file type, the D5A, which is D5's own file format, and then SKP, which is the SketchUp one. So just a note with that there, it needs, if you've saved it out of SketchUp, you need to save it as a SketchUp 2020 or below, because it doesn't actually support the 2021 file format right now. If you sent it out of SketchUp 2021 using the button, it'll work, but if you're importing it as a separate object, it needs to be on those older file formats. So I'm just going to bring in this little model here. I say it's a little model, it's quite a big model actually. A car is a big thing. So that's just going to load in. I'm just going to just pop it there for a minute. It's just loading in some textures. So we can see that we've now got a separate kind of object. And I guess you can think about this as a component. And one thing that's worth knowing is actually, yeah, if you've got something in SketchUp and you're like, oh, I wish I could just move it around in D5. So maybe you've made your cube, I don't know, a cube there that was a component. And you've been positioning it. I'm imagining it's a chair, by the way. I don't know why I didn't just find a chair. But if you right click on your component in SketchUp, you can save it directly as a separate file. So I'm just going to save that one component out as a SketchUp 2020 version cube, for example. Stick that on my desktop. And then I could actually bring that in as a separate thing. And that might be one way that you manage your own libraries of things. So if I bring my cube now, rather than just directly synchronizing it with SketchUp, which I haven't actually shown you. So let's show you that. If I make any change to the geometry within SketchUp, so for example, I drew that there, or made a change to my geometry here. In my D5 menu, I've got this option to synchronize, and that's going to push any geometry and material changes straight across into D5 just here. Whereas this one, which is this little cube I made, that's a separate thing which I can move around and reposition. So just useful to know that you can do it in a couple of different ways. But that import button that we saw there, that does mean that you can go to websites like Turbo Squid, and other kind of 3D asset websites, and actually download FBX files or SKP files and then bring those into your kind of visualization scene. I need to resynchronize those changes because I don't want these cubes on the wall. Come on, there we go. Right, there, gone. And then my cube is gone as well. Okay, so we can import in some bits and pieces, and I've got something weird going on over here. So I've broken something. That's upsetting. Oh dear. Just check what I've done. Oh, right, got it. I imported the model in on top of itself. That's stupid. Right, okay, brilliant. So we're here, so we can bring in some models. So let's have a look at the actual asset library. So built into D5 itself with your Pro subscription, we've got a whole selection of materials. So PBR materials preset. We can search for these. We can favorite them. We can add them to our own little libraries on our computer. And this is pretty much, in fact, I've got some saved that I like, so I'm just going to grab one of those. And it's pretty much as simple as dragging and dropping onto a material that you've set in SketchUp. And we can see that taking effect immediately. And we can see that that might have an effect on the way that the image is lit. As we showed earlier, it's going to change the way the color is reflected on other parts of our model. Other bits that we can see here, so we can obviously see our models. So let's go to online library. And let's have a look at the models. We can see, and I know we've got a mixture of people here on this webinar. We've got kind of interior objects, we've got tables, chairs. There's about 1,500, 2,000 models in here. We've got foliage, we've got trees, and we'll have a look at those a little bit. All sorts of things. So I'm just going to have a look at a few objects that I favorited just because I know that they look right in my mind. So I'm just going to grab this object. And if I just give it a moment, we can place it in my scene and we can see that we've got an object there now. And I'm going to grab a couple of other ones. Let's grab that light, which was a light from the asset library. Notice how it's actually casting light itself. It's actually brought that with it. Let's do another lamp as well. Let's go lamp crazy. I think there's and let's do another one. Okay, so we brought in a few different objects there, and we see this is exactly what these two are up here as well. So that is broadly how the assets work. Now, if we're looking at other things, so I know again, as we said, we've got a mixture of people. Let's just go through my outside here. You'll find a big library of foliage as well. So if we come over to nature, we can see it's about 1,300 plant objects. Just let those load. And again, very simply, we can drag, not drag, let it download. Once it's downloaded, it will stay downloaded on the computer, by the way. And it's a case of either placing it manually, or we have a few other options, other tools specific to foliage. So let's have a look at this small garden here. At the top of my screen, here's an interface that we didn't look at. We've got this draw vegetation tool, and there's a few different ways we can place vegetation. We do it via a brush. So I can actually pick. Let's use for a brush. We'll use some grass actually. So I can actually choose multiple types of grass or weeds or whatever it is. And over here, I've got my little brush. I've got a tree selected. So my tree is going to be included on that as well. Never mind, I can paint trees and grass and brush them on to my model onto any surface like so. So that's sort of one way we can do it. So we can actually mix and match our foliage. We can actually just ask it to scatter it across the whole surface. So if I did scatter, and we can grab, need to find that tree that I don't want. Oh, it doesn't matter. I can basically select a piece of geometry, click scatter, and it will randomize that across my geometry. And there's, again, options down here to be able to change how it's randomized, maybe the size of the objects there. But we can see very quickly we can produce some either scenery, or we can actually start to produce kind of a planted area. So it's some nice tools for that. There's also a third one if we're just wanting to plant things along a path. So let's do a shrub. Let's do that little bush thing there. Doing this in the long waterside path. Basically, I can draw a path, and it will place, that's probably a bit blurry for you, it will place objects along that path, and I can actually then edit that path and change how many objects are there, how big they are, if there's any randomization applied to them, this kind of stuff. So lots of tools for outdoor stuff too, which is great. But let's go back into my indoors, because the process is going to be really similar. It's just nice to know that there's those specific things there. For plants, about 15 minutes left, just to keep going. So we're inside our area at the moment. Now, I think as we talked about earlier, one of the really powerful things that D5 can do, beyond using standard light objects, so we have buttons at the top here, which allow us to place things like a point light, which is a light that goes in every direction and casts natural shadows. When we place an object, we get this inspector tab, and this is where we can adjust the intensity or the area that it can cast to, or the color temperature of that light. So we'll see this inspector tab appear for not only for light objects, but other objects as well, with their own sort of unique properties. We can see we've got, turn that one off. We've got other lights, such as spotlights, for example. So these are going to be really commonly used. Similar sets of parameters to adjust the cone angle, or even load in an IES for them. So if you have got a manufacturer's IES file, you can actually load that in here and apply different shapes and parameters. When it comes to lighting, actually, that's something worth mentioning. Over in my original SketchUp model, I've got my lights up here, for example, and these are a component, so we can see that they are duplicated. Now, in my toolbar for D5, I got this here, add light object. So because I've actually instanced this component across my model, what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert the spotlight directly into the component. And then that's going to actually place it, it's not very central there, it's going to place it into my model. And then when I come back into D5, actually, those lights are all inside my model now. So I can actually select multiple ones if I would like. How do I do that? Normal way, or plus, come on. We'll do one. Anyway, you can see that these have all been illuminated here. In fact, they should be grouped together. Let me just check where they've gone. Anyway, something's not doing what it should do. We can obviously synchronize our lighting directly with it within our model in this way, and this can be an effective way to make sure that we're getting fill light that is expected, really. But as we said, I mean, that's a fairly standard way to place lighting in a rendering engine, is to use kind of point lights, spotlights, or even things like strip lights. And again, the really nice thing here is you can see as I'm moving around my model, it's all happening as I do it. So I can see exactly how bright it is, exactly the effect that it's having on other parts of my model. I can see if I need to, if I wanted to use kind of different colored lights, we can see how we might mix and match and perhaps create a certain type of ambiance within our model, within our scene. And this is all happening in this inspector tab. So we can see really quickly how we're lighting this. Now this obviously are just lights that don't have a source which they're coming from. They're just things, abstract things creating light. Now one of the places where D5 does really excel, and I kind of alluded to it earlier with these strips here and in the little Cornell box that we looked at, is our ability to actually make an object self-illuminate, and that actually has an effect on the model. So if I just come up to my ceiling here, I've actually placed a material along this inner edge. My keys aren't doing what I want them to. Now, when I select a material using this paint dropper tool, which is what I just did then, well, I need to do it again. Now I've picked it, cancelled it. I'm going to select this. You can see me selecting different materials, hopefully. It's highlighting differently. So I'm going to select that one, and I'm going to make this one material. There's a bunch of different properties that we'll have a look at in a second. I'm going to make this emissive, and I'm going to make it just a low value 1 on the intensity. Now what we can see is straight away, we're now actually adding light into our model. And if I make it nighttime, we can see the effect that it's having there. So this actually saves the manual placement of strip lights and these kind of things that you might have previously done if you've been using a real-time renderer. And I've got it there. I've also actually got some little gaps under this floor. Can I get to these easily? Let's try it. glide up at the right angle. Oh, come on. I should have made a swatch for this. Right, there we go. On this lower edge here, I'm just going to make that below as well. Sorry, that's not a very interesting view for you. We can see, again, we can actually add light into our model simply by making an object or a material glow. So whether we're using it for things like strip lights and LEDs, or whether we're even using it for things like these lamps. So again, these lamps, and this is one of the things I really like about the asset library in D5, was we can actually edit the assets that we've brought in from the asset library. So for example, this lamp here, and maybe this kind of suggests an object or a type of piece of entourage that I want in my finished project. But we didn't have the exact one. I can simply select the material with the paint dropper tool. So in this case, it's red material. It appears in my inspector, and then I can come into my base color, and perhaps I will change that to something else. So maybe I actually just decided that that should be a kind of dark black material. Maybe I decided that should be a metal material. I'm going to increase my metal slider. I'm going to make it shiny, and I'm going to make it a lighter colored metal. So we've now got a very reflective metal surface. So we can actually edit the models for both colors and material properties. And that also means the light too. So if I select these little panels here, which should highlight, I need to get a bit closer maybe. I'm losing control of my keys. There we go. No, I selected the wood. Come on, there we are. Again, I can override, I can increase the intensity. I can even change, again, the color of that lighting. So maybe I know that I want to use a warmer colored lighting for that particular object. Maybe we've got lamps. We found a really nice model on SketchUp of a nice type of lamp. In this example, is paper lantern. Again, similar thing. I can apply an emissive material to the material that makes up the outer skin of it. We've now got a lamp that is behaving like a lamp. Without having to place any of those artificial light sources around it. We'll do the same again for this wrong one. Yeah, there we go. So we can see, let's make that something a bit different. We can see how we can very quickly start to make quite sweeping changes to the way that our scene looks, simply through having access to this very sophisticated lighting engine. And yeah, we can keep doing that all over the place. So I'm talking a lot about lights because I think that's a really important component of making a model look like this. But again, I've got these lamps here, these ceiling lights which came in, and I want to show them lit. I'm just gonna turn them on. It's daylight now actually, but if I increase the brightness of them, we can see the glow is actually casting light into our scene. So very, very quickly, we can start to create something really compelling. Now I am running out of time, but let's just show the last kind of components of the materials. Now, we showed me enabling emissive properties on each one of these things. And in fact, maybe now I've got some lights, I might want to turn on a bit more bloom. There we go, just to give it the suggestion of being a bit brighter as well. Let's just have a look at this this product that I brought in. So again, this is really powerful even as a kind of product rendering tool. I've got my paint dropper tool here. We can see this geometry that's coming from SketchUp. It's obviously being lit by the world, but it looks very flat. It doesn't really look particularly natural. So let's edit a few materials on here and let's have a look at the basic material functions that we have. So if I click on that white paint, we'll see that it's gone to the inspector for this one material here. And the primary options that we have, we're supporting standard PBR material. So We have something at the top here called our material templates. This is the normal stuff. So we've got the option to set our base color. So maybe red. You've got the option to bring in a texture. If you'd rather use a texture, normal maps to introduce a bumpiness. If we're using the built-in assets, these will be pre-populated. So I could maybe even have a look at one of those. Let's try and see what we can find. Let's try paint. Lots of wall paints. There we go. I could grab this blue metallic car paint. Let's drop that on there. There we go. Oh, it's more than metallic. It's like actual metal. So this is actually pre-configured for us, but we can come in and override it. So perhaps I want a different colored thing. Maybe I don't want it to be a metal, but I want it to be a kind of shiny paint. There's various different bits and pieces. So the car paint, for example, under material template, we've got custom, which has got our basic properties, emissive, AO maps, some other bits and pieces that you might use if you download a selection of materials from elsewhere. But the actual materials are some specific materials for certain purposes. So we've got transparent material for glass. We'll have a look at that. We've got a water material, which can create pools and ponds and these kinds of things. We've got the car paint material, which we just looked at, and that can be used for car paint, or it can be used for even varnished wood. That's something a little bit different, where it actually applies a lacquer on top of the base material. So for example, I have a slightly less shiny material, but I can actually apply a coating on top of that, which has its own properties. So you could imagine a wood texture or a photo texture of wood, but we want to have the appearance of a thick layer of lacquer. We can use that car paint option for that, even though it's called car paint. But displacement option, which is a certain type of material, which you'll sometimes find. So I think this panel is one. Have a look. Yeah, and displacement map allows us to add simulated depth. So in the case of these wood panels, this isn't geometry. I've simply found a paneled material that gives me the impression of depth, and that will change with the lighting as well, and shadows will be cast correctly into that. But let's just go back to my car. We've got a kind of car paint. Other materials that we'll see. Really important one, actually. I probably should have come to this sooner. We've got a cloth material, which allows us to apply a fall off. Have I got an example of somewhere I can use that quickly? Let's grab an asset. Let's grab one. Let's grab a model of some furniture, or maybe just like a cushion or something. Let's grab a sofa. That's probably got some cushions on it. Oh, there we go. Let's grab that little footrest, footstool. I think that's what it is. Let's just drop that in. Let's just get that into the light a bit more so it's easier for you to see. Maybe I need to face that side. Okay, so I think it's a leather one, but never mind. Let's make it a cloth one. So the cloth material template, which I'm going to turn on there, that has some options to create a fall off, which allows us to kind of give either kind of a cloth-like sort of velvet-like effect, which is sometimes quite difficult to achieve in a real-time render. So that's really important, I know, for people who are doing interiors, because you make your fabrics actually look a little bit more like, well, like fabrics. So you've got the fall-off material, the cloth material. You don't have to apply it to cloth. You might use it in other places. We've got options for transparent objects. We've got foliage, which allows us to make materials where light can shine through it, and there might be like another material kind of inside of it. I can't show you an example of that very easily, but we apply that to leaves. We sometimes use it on human skin, so we have the outer color of our skin with a base layer of kind of a red fleshy color under it, and it just means that when light hits it, it hits in a different way. We've also got a grass material, which we didn't look at, so we can actually make any single surface sprout grass. So if I click grass, it'll actually automatically just make that entire surface have some geometry as well. So for exteriors and other things, again, really useful. So lots of different things, but I think hopefully the sense that we can get here is that we can do things very, very quickly, very easily, and we can get very natural looking results in a pretty intuitive way, just using a few different parameters. So as we saw there, obviously there is a portion of rendering which is, you have to dedicate your time to making sure your lighting is correct, making sure your material is correct. But this makes this all very easy, especially with that asset library that's there, which allows us to really, really quickly populate our model. And as I said, you have full editing control over it. So you might see a sofa that suggests what I want, but the color's not right. Come in, change it. Really great for that kind of thing. So I think that is probably most of, we're coming around for an hour now, that's probably most of the stuff that is kind of important, early days. And tell you what, I'm going to make that bumper metal. So I just spotted that, something that always makes a really big difference. Shiny things always make a big difference. Metal bumper, white metal. And the other thing I didn't change, which I had set up to change, is going to make my mirror. I don't want it to be a mirror anymore. I want it to be a transparent glass window. There we go. Right, so it was just my little last finishing touches I wanted to make. So hopefully you get a sense there for kind of how easy that is to kind of make things that look quite natural. And I think that's pretty much all the stuff we wanted to cover. So as I said, D5 Render is £265 a year for a subscription, and that is available from your SketchUp reseller. So again, you probably purchase SketchUp via a UK authorized reseller. If you'd like to get it, give them a bell, look on their website, and they can sort that out for you. So I think let's go over to any other questions that we might have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, switch to camera. There we are. Oh, there are loads of questions. I've got to scroll down that list there. 1 sec. Loads of questions, right. Let's go to the top of that list and do these in order. Will this, yeah, this will be downloadable. If you've signed on to this, we'll send you the link automatically. How does it integrate with SketchUp, Blender, Rhino? I think I probably answered that after you asked me that question. So there was a slide for that. There are plugins for those different things. What graphics card are we using? Quadro RTX 4000. We've got how does D5 library compare to Enscape? Can't really comment, I'm afraid. There's about 3,000 assets in D5. That's all I can say. But I'd say one advantage is you can edit them, which is really nice. You can't actually change the color of them or change the way they behave in Enscape, which is sometimes a little bit bothersome. Okay, so somebody said there, even though I find still learning Enscape, I find it difficult to apply an LED light strip to an interior. Are the artificial lighting options in D5 more extensive? Again, hopefully, Natalie, you've seen how we can actually make, even you could literally draw an LED tube, or actually, I did have another example of that. I've just pressed something that's made my screen go black, and I don't know what I've done. I actually had an object in my library for that, so hopefully you can see my screen, but I've got a little oh no, it's not there. I must have got rid of it. Let's see. No, I know where it is. Let's grab it. It's on my desktop. I've just got a little piece of geometry that's been made of SketchUp for a neon sign. And that's probably a relatively good example of how working with those emissive surfaces is a lot easier with the technology that we have here. So those LED strips, those tube lights, we simply can just make those glow. And this is exactly the same as what we've been doing. Sorry, I feel like I've probably shown you this about 10 times. So apologies for repeating myself, because I've probably already answered it. We can essentially make things that influence our world, whether it's normal colored, whether it's neon colored. We'll see how we can do that. Right. Can you import HDRI from your own library? Yes, you can create custom HDRIs, which you just bring in from the folder, custom IES. What else have we got? So yeah, Matthew Wilson there's asked me about the libraries for plants. You can, of course, bring in, as I showed you there, bring in those SketchUp plant components you might have found on the 3D warehouse. You could actually bring those in and actually set those up with kind of more appropriate surfaces. You could save those into your own internal library to use for other things if you find a nice one that works well, or you can use the built-in library that's there, which is pretty extensive for plants. Obviously, there are thousands of plants all over the world. I think the challenge with these programs is trying to get plants that are relative, sort of appropriate for the country that you're in. So is it possible to create light in SketchUp with the D5 light source? Yes, we saw that in the plugin. What type of lighting is supported? So we've got area, mesh, omni, sun. Yep, so in terms of the lighting objects that we saw, which were here, we've got omnidirectional point lights, spotlights, which support IES, strip lights for producing strip lights, and area lights or rectangular lights. And then our actual world itself has sunlight or HDRI with a separate sun option that we can turn on. Apart from that, oh, there we go. I'm reading these in order and I should have gone through them as we went through. My spotlights look weird. They probably did. I was didn't do a very good job of those. Right, so used some Glyn there who used Lumion. Will a demo of D5 allow me to export large resin? So I think that's one of the limits. There is a community version of D5 and that has a limitation on the resolution it will allow you to output. I think the community version is for fun and professional use, personal use only. It's not licensed for commercial use, but you know, you can have a look at it. How do you make the carpet look like carpet without looking like grass? So there's no function at the moment to make fibrous carpet, but there are materials that have the correct reflective roughness and kind of fall off properties in the asset library, I'm sure. Let's have a look. But it would be a case of just applying that to the floor. If not, if it's not one there, we can go online, find, oh no, there's a rug. I'm on models, not materials. Yeah, so we've got a few different ones there. So let's just have a look at do that kind of thing. Real-time renderers try and avoid the sort of fibrous stuff that we see. We'll do it for foliage and grass and stuff, but we'll try and avoid it for carpet because it's super intensive. Things melt really quickly. But I've seen some really amazing videos where people have created a single fiber and applied it across a whole surface, which is clever. Are there packages available that incorporate SketchUp and D5? No, they're totally separate things. Do you do a student license? There isn't a student license, but there is the community edition, which, as I said, isn't licensed for commercial use, but if you're a student, you could use it for that. File formats supported, I think I covered it, FBX, SKP, and D5A, which is its own one. And then if you've used the plugin, it will come straight across from that. D5 2.1 will support opening SKP 2021. I don't know the answer to that, but I'd imagine that probably will be coming. It's just extra work that needs to be done. But you can, as I said, if you've got your model open in SketchUp 2021, in the first instance that you send it across, that will automatically convert it into that. Does it have an NPR mode? I don't think there is a line rendering mode. There is certainly a white view mode, which I didn't show you, but there isn't a line rendering mode right now. Can we retain the transparency of materials such as glass if we want to bring that final render into Photoshop for post? So actually, when we actually render the final image, we have the option here for channels, and that will export out a channel map that will show, I think it sends 4 or 5 different ones, a reflection map, a material ID map, maybe an object ID map, and a couple of other ones. So yeah, if you want to use that for selection purposes, you can do. The reflections are super good anyway, and you have a degree of control over them simply by changing the material properties. And can we bring in materials from ArchiCAD? I've not used it with ArchiCAD, so I don't know what that behavior is when it sends it across, and I don't know what ArchiCAD's models, materials look like. I suspect it brings, just as it does in SketchUp, I imagine it probably brings through the images. I don't know what ArchiCAD support is for PBR materials, but at the bare minimum, I imagine it's bringing through the texture of wood or whatever you might be using. Right, I think that is all my questions answered there. If anybody else wants to see anything or has any other questions, now's your chance. But I think other than that, I think we're all done. So thanks ever so much for joining. I really appreciate you coming on live. It makes a really big difference because it takes a lot of time to set these things up and prepare all the bits and pieces. If you'd like to, as I said, if you'd like to buy D5 render, contact your local reseller. If you have any questions at all beyond what we've said today, feel free to send me an email, whether it's about SketchUp, whether it's about D5, whether it's about something else. My job is to help our customers get the best from those things that we bought. So again, thanks very much. We'll send out a recording of the webinar afterwards, and have a good rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.